Born in Cleveland, raised a hillbilly. What's your story? Welcome to the Hillbilly Justice on the School Bus podcast. Here's your host, Sarah Blossom Ware.
Welcome back to the Hillbilly Justice on the School Bus podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Blossom Ware. Today I'll be reading the chapter entitled, What Happens at the Blue Hole Stays at the Blue Hole. Another summertime family favorite was going swimming in the Blue Hole. The Blue Hole was a long way down a dirt road. There was one spot in the road that always had standing water across it. We never knew how deep the water was because the depth was constantly changing, depending on the amount of rainfall we'd received and whether the road had gotten washed out or not since the last crossing. Sometimes Dad would stop the car and get out and survey the situation from several angles, much like a golfer trying to read the lay of the green before an important putt. In the end, Dad's approach would always be the same. He would back up the car and get a running start at it and just plow right through the middle. Sometimes we sped on through to the other side without much incidents. Sometimes the water would cover the entire hood, and the force of our quick approach would gently float us across. The latter generally resulted in a stall out. We would just wait a while until the car dried out, then start it back up and get on our way. The Blue Hole was blue, but it would more aptly be named the Snake Hole. If no other swimmers were present when we arrived, we had to take a few minutes to throw rocks in and scare the snakes away before entering the water. On the other hand, if it was too crowded when we arrived, we would yell, "Snake!" to clear people out. The Blue Hole was an unusually deep, wide pool of water in an otherwise very narrow and shallow creek. There was a large rock bluff on the far side of the deep pool. We could access the bluff by swimming to a rock ledge and then hoisting ourselves out of the water. We would then climb to the top of the bluff and jump off. It was really a beautiful swimming hole. George and I learned to swim in the Blue Hole. Dad said, "Are you ready to learn how to swim?" I said yes, and he threw me out into the deep water and let my survival instinct kick in. I am such a sucker, paying for swimming lessons for my daughters through the Park District. One day, my dad went swimming in the Blue Hole with his good friend. We'll call him Leroy, and Leroy's wife, 2 kids, and mother-in-law. Dad and Leroy had been drinking quite heavily, as they were prone to do, when a carload of people they didn't know pulled up and began swimming. After a few minutes, one of the newcomers got out of the water, walked over to his towel, and flung it up in the air with a very deliberate motion. He then began ranting and raving and gave a general address to the swimmers. "Where's my watch? I had it here and now it's gone. I want to know which one of y'all stole my watch." No one fessed up, and he turned his attention to Leroy specifically. "Where's my watch?" Without saying a word, Leroy got out of the Blue Hole, walked over to his truck, and walked back with his deer rifle. He stared at his accuser and carefully addressed him. "I don't know where you're from, but where I'm from, we don't take kindly to being accused of thievery." Leroy then instructed everyone to line up in a straight line and said, "I want everyone to strip down completely naked. And if I don't find that watch on anyone, I'm going to shoot you." He pointed his rifle at the stranger. My dad knew that Leroy was half crazy, but he was stifling the urge to laugh while standing rigidly in line at gunpoint. It was very quiet until Leroy's mother-in-law defiantly broke the silence by declaring, "You're going to have to shoot me first before I get naked in front of you and all these people here." The accusing stranger surveyed the situation and came to the realization that he was out crazied. He began backtracking. "Oh, I was mistaken. I must have left my watch in the truck or something. Heck, I don't even own a watch." Then he and his friends took off running toward his truck and sped away. Since no one actually got naked or shot, Dad and Leroy and the gang were basically unfazed by the encounter and continued with their swim. When Leroy finally arrived back home, he found 2 Prairie Grove police officers waiting in his driveway. "We heard you pulled a pistol on some people at the Blue Hole. They got your license plate number and called it in. Leroy responded truthfully. "You can search my house. I don't even own a pistol." The officers just shrugged at one another and decided not to pursue the report any further. So before we get into introductions for our panel discussion members, I wanted to make one correction from a previous podcast. When Len Cruz was talking about his backyard hens that turned into roosters following the death of the main roosters, and I basically said, "You're crazy. Hens don't turn into roosters." But my curiosity got the best of me, and I Googled chicken sex reversal and found that it's really a thing. So my apologies to Len, and it's really an interesting kind of a Google search that came up. So I just wanted to make that small correction. And also the format for today's podcast is changing from the previous just in a little bit too, in that before we had 4 panel discussion members, and now we're going to try it with just 2. So without further ado, I would like for our panel members to introduce themselves, first with a 6-word summary, and then go ahead and expand on your background and your current walk in life.
Hi, I'm Laura Valcour, and I'm a chef instructor. I teach children from preschool all the way through high school. And I've been described as passionate and energetic, and the Energizer bunny by my students. And I'm always looking for new stories, so I really enjoyed Sarah's stories. I'm also a keeper of my wisdom file, so I share that with my students as well.
Okay, great. So we're looking forward to hearing some of your wisdoms from your wisdom file.
I brought a few along.
Oh, good. And just another note about Laura is that she is a non-traditional student also. So she is taking some classes. She also teaches some classes. So, a different kind of a student than I believe we've had in the past for the panel. So, okay, next.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Kremer. If I were to describe myself in 6 words or less, I'd go with mother, bassoonist, yogi, environmentalist.
Okay, that's great.
And I'm a science outreach librarian at Benedictine University, which means I interact with all the different science faculty and encourage information literacy skills, so how to find articles, how to improve your research. And, what really drew me in is I worked with Sarah on a class, and then I also have done previous book discussions. So I wanted to kind of look at her book and then see how to tie it into my own life.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So some people describe the book as kind of therapeutic. So we'll see how it goes today in that form. But also, it's also meant to make people laugh. So hopefully in this podcast we'll kind of have some of each of those kind of components. And also a side note that I have for about Cynthia is that she has actually written a lot of the questions, even for the previous podcast. And has looked over, kind of some of the questions that I've thought might be interesting for the panel members to answer. So I really appreciate that and all the involvement that you've had up front, even on this project.
You're welcome.
So now, also before we get into the actual discussion questions, it's time for a segment that I call, So What Have You Been Busy With Lately? And so for this session, for this podcast, I would like to go ahead and give that question to Cynthia. So Cynthia, what have you been busy with lately?
Well, I am a mother of an 11-month-old daughter, so that keeps me pretty busy when she's learning to walk, and it's all new to me. I recently went to the Pitchfork Music Festival, which is an indie music festival in Chicago that they hold every year, and there are a lot of great acts there, so I kind of got to look at the acts and look at the people seeing the acts. and kind of get a feel for what's going on. And I'm looking forward to, I play in a community band, and we're going to be playing at the Texas Bandmasters Association meeting in San Antonio over this coming weekend. So I've been preparing for that as well.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So you played the bassoon?
I played the bassoon.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were some of your favorite acts at Pitchfork?
Well, I really like a band called the New Pornographers. They've been around for a while, but where I was standing, they were just dead on, and they sounded great in a festival setting, which is kind of a challenge to do.
Okay, I have to look them up. I do not know that group, but it sounds interesting.
Right. Well, they probably went for an interesting name. That's how it goes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. So in the chapter about, what happens at the Blue Hole stays at the Blue Hole, I was talking about when I learned how to swim and when my brother George learned how to swim. We both learned how to swim in the Blue Hole, and it was very unstructured as opposed to my daughters who've learned in the pool with park instructors, actual trained swimming instructors. And so I thought it would be interesting to hear from you guys. Where did you learn how to swim, and how old were you, approximately?
I can start there, Sarah.
Okay, Laura?
This is Laura. So I had a very similar experience like you, and we went to a neighbor's home, and they had this 4.5-foot pool, and everyone jumped in, and I was standing there. I had never had the experience, and I said, "Sure, I can swim." So I jumped in and as close to the sides of that pool as I could, and I held on for dear life and pushed myself and just doggy paddled from one side to the next. And over a period of time that night, I taught myself to swim.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
That's pretty good.
Hopefully there was some adult supervision.
Not too much.
Well, you survived. You're here today.
This is true.
Okay.
I think I was more embarrassed than anything else. I had to make sure I got across that to the other side.
Oh, yeah. You had to save face with your friends.
Sure.
Okay. I'm glad it worked out for you.
Me too. Well, I took swimming lessons, believe it or not, at the place where I work now. There used to be a pool there. So they had swimming lessons. I was probably 5, maybe. And they would, so my mom took me, and the pool was at the first level, and there was a second level up top where the parents would be kind of behind glass watching. So my mom is watching. I'm in this swimming lesson. They have everybody on a platform, but it's kind of crowded on the platform, and I fell off the platform, and I was drowning, and my mom is up in there saying, "My daughter is falling," and this instructor didn't see anything. Another kid just pulled me back up, and after that, I was like, "Oh, I don't know how much I like this whole swim thing." And, they were really serious there. They had a low dive and a high dive. And if you didn't voluntarily jump off the low dive, like you're too scared, they would throw you off the high dive. So what do you think happened to me? I didn't really want to go off that low dive. So this, there was a big guy to me, threw me off the high dive. So I did eventually learn how to swim. But it was kind of
traumatic,
a little more intense than you'd like it to be.
So how did this big guy carry you up the ladder to the big?
Well, they were behind you on the ladder, and they just kind of made you like walk the plank. And then there was another guy like sitting there at the bottom, and they're like, "You jump or we're throwing you in."
And you weren't jumping. Okay.
And I wasn't jumping. So they're like, "All right, here we go."
And she's here.
Awesome.
And I'm here, and I can swim.
Okay. So also kind of in line with, we were at the Blue Hole, and it was really, really beautiful there, as I mentioned, and, and I still have the image, many images from visits there in my mind. And I've heard from several people that now there's no access unless you get permission from an owner. And people still try to go there all the time. I mean, by people, I mean like my people like in Arkansas and Prairie Grove area, Cove Creek. But, it's more than my family who knows about it. It's really a pretty place. So the next kind of discussion question I had was, what is your earliest memory of something beautiful in nature that really stands out still in your memory?
All right. Well, I went somewhere kind of very similar. It was in central Missouri. It was a teacher's resort along the Jacks Forks River, and it was called Bunker Hill Resort. It's still there. And it sounds very similar to this place you're describing, where they had very scenic bluffs and a river that went by and rocks and little rustic cabins. And since my grandma was a teacher, Missouri teacher, she and all her friends would go. So we would go there for the summers and canoe and go on hikes to the spring where you would have a cup and you could, drink water from the spring. And it was just a real natural place.
And then the spring was probably not tested officially.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're like, this looks
right.
And, it's the exact same place. It's exactly how it was when my mom went there as a kid. So that's kind of the fun part about it.
When was the last time you were there?
I was probably there just for a visit, like to drive by, maybe in my late teens.
Okay, so it's been a while. It's interesting to visit places that you knew as a child. For me, it was interesting to go and visit my grannies, there's another podcast coming up about my granny, several actually. But it was really surreal to go and see her house, as an adult, and a lot of memories came back. So, I think it's really interesting to do that and go back, and it's always different than you remember, I think. Maybe it's the same sometimes, but...
Well, you're a different size,
right,
and, to you, it's a big, spacious cabin, then you come back and you're like, this is kind of small.
It always seems smaller, doesn't it?
Okay, how about you, Laura?
And every time I'm in the woods and I smell pine, I just go right back to being 9 years old and going to a Girl Scout camp that we visited on the northern Indiana is what I can remember. I just remember it was a 4.5-hour ride, and first time away from home, and you're in this large bus with girls from all over. And all age groups, and they're all singing, and I didn't know one camp song, but we arrived, and it was just beautiful. The smells, the birds, the trees everywhere. It was sandy. There was a lake there that's where we did swim, so I was happy for that. But cabins everywhere, and you could go either rustic cabins or we were doing some tent camping also. And those experiences of being outdoors and the survival instincts set in, it was wonderful.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. The outdoors are really special to kids, I feel like. And I don't go camping now, but I think that's kind of because I grew up camping almost as far as the house, the cabin that we had, the way we lived. But, nevertheless, I was in the woods all the time. I was in nature all the time. And, my dad walking through the woods with me and pointing out, this is an oak tree, an elm tree when there were still elm trees around and things, I think that it's really special for kids, And so hopefully, I live in the, suburbs now with a fence and a little yard and things and neighbors close by, but my kids really enjoy going back to Arkansas because it's not something that they don't have that nature here really. We walk along the Fox River and they really like that too, but yeah, for sure a lot of early memories and like the smells that trigger things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So on to a kind of a different kind of a question. Is related to when Leroy was falsely accused of stealing this stranger's watch. So I thought, let's see if you panel members have had a time when you were falsely accused of something. How did that go over? How did it get resolved?
Oh, I remember one. This was an easy one to remember. I had dolls from all nations, and I was so proud of these dolls. And my mother had a set of candies that matched my dolls. And I would go into the refrigerator and look at these candies and just really, I fell in love with all the different cultures. And one time I went into the refrigerator to look at it, and one of the heads was missing from one of the candies. And I knew there was going to be some trouble. So I hid myself away. And the next thing we knew, we were called into the dining room to be asked, my brother and I, what happened. And of course, I said, no, I didn't touch it. And my brother had eaten it. Of course, he told me this later, but he had eaten one of the dolls. He wanted to try it to see what it would taste like, right? And they were just so perfect. There was no way I was going to open that box. But I was falsely accused, and I went away crying. And it was never really resolved. My brother, to this day, remembers eating the head off that. And he apologized to me, but he never let my mother know. Never let her know.
So the next family gathering, you should stir that up.
Comes out.
Exactly. And so were these candies just perpetually supposed to be there, like forever and always, and not eaten? Or like, I don't really have candies like that in my fridge, so
I don't either.
It was
a new concept.
I think it was because they were considered gourmet at the time. You know, this was something that we didn't have, but they were very decorated. It was almost like they were marzipan, but they were hardened, and they were just very decorative, very colorful. So they were more like an artwork. And she kept them in the refrigerator, thinking that probably if they sat out on the counter, something would happen to them. Well, something happened to them.
Wow, that's torturous, though, for a kid. I mean, a kid likes chocolate or whatever flavor, marzipan. It's kind of...
I never tasted it.
No, you don't know.
So I don't know.
It was your brother.
It's an almond.
Paste.
Oh, yeah, almond. Okay.
Yeah, it's more to be decorative, I think.
But I think these were more sugar because they were hard. Marzipan is a more soft material. So.
And where are these dolls now? They're still in your parents' refrigerator with one head missing.
That's hard to say. I bet they're still there.
Oh.
All right, next family gathering. We're getting to the bottom of a lot of things here. So let us know. Okay, what about you, Cynthia?
Well, I have a scenario that I think kind of fits this question.
Kind of fits. That's
so
fine.
I was in college, and my grandma gave me her mittens. Okay, so they're pretty distinctive. They're not really that great, you know. They're good keeping my hands warm. They're kind of old looking. So they're definitely mine, and they have my dirty fingerprints and all of that. And I had this biology lab, and I left my mittens there. And another woman picked them up. And, you know, I was kind of bummed. It was winter. It was, you know, South Bend, Indiana, kind of cold. And I got back to biology lab the next week, and I see her wearing the mittens. And I'm like, oh, I am so glad you found those mittens. And she goes, those aren't your mittens. I said, my grandma gave them to me. She said, my grandma gave them to me. And I got into this argument with her in front of the TA, and I basically had to let her have my mittens.
Uh-oh.
Because the TA, because she had them at the time, and it looked like I was trying to take them from her.
Oh.
And so I then was like, I think this is my first experience with a pathological liar. I just couldn't, I had to just walk away from the scenario.
Wow. Okay. So you lost your grandma's mittens.
I lost my grandma's mittens.
And then you found them, but so close.
But I didn't, I wasn't sure what else I could do at that point.
Oh, so now if, as an older adult, what would you have done differently?
I think I would have just kept arguing about it. I'll be like, no, they're dirty. Those are my fingerprints.
And yanked him off.
Yeah. Because I just feel so strongly about it. It's like when you're right, you just...
Right. A lot of emotions are going on there.
There isn't either. I think I would have let them go, though.
Oh, okay.
Just said you could have them.
Right, if she's that passionate.
Exactly, yeah. Would have been hard, though.
Well, okay, so kind of along this same line, at the end of this story, the police officers were wanting to search Leroy's house, and he told a big half-truth, basically, about what types of guns he had and didn't have. So I was just thought, let's see, what is the biggest half-truth that either you have ever told someone or that someone has told you?
Well, I can go. I think the best stories for this type of thing are ghost stories, where everybody embellishes what goes on. So I went to Bennett Academy, which is a high school here that used to be an orphanage. So it was pretty haunted. And so my freshman year, I went to this dance. It was late at night when it was done, and we had to go back into Ben Hall because that's where my boyfriend at the time had a locker. And all our stuff was in there. So we're going down this dark hallway, and we hear something. And I'm not really sure what it was. I mean, it kind of sounded like children playing or something. But he was freaked out. He booked it out of there. He just left me standing there in the locker. And he just flew away. I couldn't believe how fast he was going. So I was like, okay. But then I had to tell all my friends the story that, oh, yeah, there were like these children playing sounds. Like Greg was terrified and he ran away. And, so then I went and, even though I wasn't really sure what it was, I went ahead and made it into a real ghost story because I thought that'd be way more fun.
So did they buy it?
Oh, yeah. Because that's not the only ghost story for that area, that hall.
I hadn't heard that about Bennett Academy, but I have heard that about Benedictine University, that there are catacombs. Oh, I've heard all kinds of stories from the students. I really don't know that there are catacombs, but that would be cool. Like, it's interesting to think about it and to to play around with these things in your mind that really they're not true, but it's fun anyway to kind of believe the half-truths sometimes.
Well, especially in your high school when you're like 14 years old, I think it's really pretty fun to scare each other.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That is fun. Mine is not a half-truth, though.
Oh.
From me, anyway. But I remember catching my dad at a half-truth. And
Let's hear it. Your family's coming out. Okay.
They are. One of my dear friends, I'm not going to mention any names just in case she's listening. But her parents were very strict, and she was not allowed out of the house. But this was her 16th birthday. And so my father said, we're going to take care of her. Let her come to our house, and the girls are having a sleepover, and we'll make sure that she's okay. And so what did we do? Of course, what all teenagers do. You go out and you have your first beer or your first glass of wine. Well, she got completely plastered.
Uh-oh.
And the next thing we knew is she arrived. Somehow we got separated, but everyone ended back at my house for the slumber party, and my girlfriend walked in the door, and the first thing that happened was a phone call from her mother. And because I don't speak Greek, I have no idea what was said. All I know is the voice level changed completely, very shrill, and a lot of back and forth. And the next thing I knew, my father was asked to be put on the phone. And I know that he was interrogated. And one of the things that he said is, oh, the girls, oh, yes, they've had such a great time. They've been here all night. And yes, they're drinking. Yes, of course they're drinking. Oh, we've got all types of things here. He never actually said what we were drinking, but she stayed. Her mother let her continue to stay, and we never let her in on that story. To this day, I don't think she knows that her daughter was having a lot of fun that night.
Yeah, she doesn't need to know that.
No.
At this point, yeah.
But my father was now, the god of all, by all my friends, he was the god of everything.
Oh, yeah. You always want to go to that house.
Oh, yes.
I know. I had a friend like that whose mother, would buy for us in high school. And yeah, she was where we wanted to be. I can tell you that was the house. But okay, well, I think that's about wrapping it up for our discussion questions. But I want to go ahead and open it up to you guys. Do you have any kind of final comments for this session, or did anything kind of come up that you were thinking, that we should talk about that, but we didn't quite get a place to do that?
Oh, I just want to reinforce the beauty of nature. I mean, that's a wonderful theme to have as the backdrop for this chapter.
I thought the story of Leroy and the blue hole had to be one of my favorite stories throughout the book, and I just love the humor in it. I can just imagine it.
Yeah, this was one of the ones that was added towards the end because I don't want to implicate people. It's not a very glamorous story about Leroy. So actually, he is the only character whose name I changed. And then I said, we'll call him Leroy. Everyone else is the real name. So Leroy's still around on this earth, and surprisingly to me. Thank you for listening to the Hillbilly Justice on the School Bus Podcast. Tune in next time to hear what caused my mom to plop down on a bar stool, order a shot of whiskey, and bum a cigarette. Until then, dream big and have fun.